Hey everyone, this is Allison from Thriving Well Disabled, and coming to you today from the other side of the bridge from where I usually record. That back there is one of my more common locations, and as you can see, the tide is relatively high today and flowing pretty strongly. I wrote about medical trauma this past week and how most of us have had some form of traumatic experience, especially in regard to our medical care, whether it was trauma with a capital T or trauma with a lowercase t, or just hurtful and upsetting experiences, which in many cases I would categorize as that lowercase t trauma, especially when it's repeated. So what do you do about it? I talked before about things that you as an individual can do for yourself, but in all honesty, I think that very often it's very useful to get a professional involved. And the professional to talk to in this kind of case is a psychologist of some sort. There's a lot of different forms of talk therapists, some of whom are trained psychologists, others of whom are social workers or other professionals that come at it from a slightly different angle. There's also a variety of forms of training or psychological schools of thought that different psychologists subscribe to. My opinion, and this is my opinion based on my experiences, a truly bad therapist can do a lot of damage, and a caring and well-meaning therapist can be extremely helpful. The best is to find somebody who has experience with issues similar to yours or that echo yours, and also to have somebody who has previous knowledge of or experience with the type of health condition that you have or something similar. For really rare conditions, that's usually not possible, but what often will help then is finding somebody who's willing to do the research and really understand what you have and how it functions. Another really important thing is finding somebody who respects the aspects of your identity that are what makes you you and aren't psychologically damaging. So, for example, it's fine to have a psychologist who doesn't share your religious views, but a psychologist who believes that your religious views are wrong is going to be inherently unhealthy, even if you minimize the discussion of your religion and religious views. Minimizing it might help a little, but it also leads to you feeling ashamed or feeling guilty or things like that. For me personally, I was raised in a Christian family. My mother was raised Catholic and became Episcopalian. My father was raised, I think, Protestant, but wasn't particularly expressive. And I have shifted to a pagan perspective, and my therapist is Jewish. The key thing here is she respects my pagan background and basically feels like whatever your religious beliefs are, that's okay as long as they support your mental and emotional health. She agrees, mine do. It's a non-issue. It doesn't have to be somebody who agrees with you. It doesn't have to be somebody who shares that identity with you. But what it does need to be is somebody who respects your background and your identity. Does that make sense? What's so useful or so good about seeing a therapist? Well, basically, they are a person who, one, you can talk to about yourself And that's what they're there for. Two, very often, having experienced trauma or abuse or other potentially unhealthy interactions, the therapist can help you determine what is and isn't healthy and what is and isn't good and helpful for you to flourish. Sometimes a lot of the therapy is about unlearning habits that hurt you, and sometimes it's about creating new habits that are healthier for you. But this is why I talk about how very important it is to find somebody who respects your experience and your perspective. As a bisexual person, I don't need to see a therapist who's bi. I don't even need to see a therapist who's in the LGBT community. But I do need to see a therapist who respects that the bi identity exists and doesn't feel that bisexuality is inherently unhealthy or negative. That's what I'm talking about. It's that distinction. Therapists help you put a mirror up to your life that can help you really reflect on your experiences and reflect on your understanding and help you have a deeper sense of how you relate to the world and how fair, unfair, appropriate, inappropriate, healthy, and unhealthy your reflections and experiences are for your growth as a human being. As an example, there's this concept of love maps, which is the way your brain processes the expression of love, what a healthy relationship looks like, what healthy interactions are when you are with other people, and things like that. And that mental love map is mainly developed from your experiences as a child. So very often, if you grew up with a not so great love map and then had traumatic experiences, especially that combination, it's really, really hard to know when you do something that gets a negative reaction, whether you did something that wasn't healthy for the relationship or whether your partner did, said, or accessed something that wasn't particularly healthy for the relationship. It's hard to know what healthy interactions are when you haven't had them. And it's hard to know how to have a healthy relationship with yourself if you don't know what a healthy relationship looks like. So the idea of a therapist is to, one, help you process what you've been through, and two, help you recognize what healthy relationships look like and how to have one. And that can help you recognize when you're in relationships that aren't as good for you as you thought, or when you're not treating yourself well, and when, sometimes just bad stuff happens and you have to deal with it and move on and move forward. Therapists can be a really powerful sounding board for that and can be really helpful in recognizing your own damage, your own weaknesses, your own hurtful qualities, both to yourself and to others, and to help you recognize if others are treating you in a negative way, and why that might hurt. So therapists are your sounding board, and therapists can be your guide. And it's required that you have a deeply trusting relationship with them for them to be able to help. If you're constantly evaluating if what they're saying is true, then it's harder for you to absorb what they're saying, especially as you get deeper and you're exploring beliefs that you have about yourself. Those can be hard to break. And so if you're questioning the validity of the argument from the person who's trying to help you, that's really hard to, it's hard to progress. By the same token, a bad therapist can do a lot of damage because they're helping you shape your worldview. They're helping you adjust your behaviors. They're helping you have a deeper understanding. And if the information that they're giving you is not healthy, not helpful, that's another set of baggage that you need to process and eventually unlearn or work through, potentially another trauma. So what's really important is not just finding a therapist, but finding a therapist who you can form a deeply trusting relationship with and who you can work with for the long term. Because generally speaking, a commitment to a therapist is longer term than it may be to many different other types of doctors, and it's a much more intense and emotionally intimate relationship. So when you're looking for a therapist, you're looking for somebody who can really dig in deep with you and who you can be your whole self with. Because if you can't be your whole self with the therapist, what's the point? If you're hiding something from your therapist, why are you seeing them? It needs to be a space where what you are doing and how you are feeling is met with compassion and met with support. And so it's really, really vital that you can trust, that you feel that you can trust your therapist so that you can rebuild yourself, potentially from the inside out, I have an entire post all about thinking through finding and hunting for finding the right therapist for you, which I'll link in here. But I just, want to make it really clear that therapy is very useful for pretty much anybody. There are some people who find it harder to find a therapist. There are some people who might only want or need a brief period with a therapist. But I think anybody can benefit from a few conversations with a well-trained therapist with aligned perspectives. And I think that can be incredibly productive even when your life is going reasonably well and you do feel pretty good about yourself and you do feel like you've got a good, healthy sense of things. There's always things that can be improved a bit. There's always things that can be tweaked. There's always things that can work a little better. So I just want to make that really clear. I think that therapy is useful for anybody. I think it can be helpful. And I think too many disabled people don't see a therapist because the problem is physical and they don't think about that mental and emotional acceptance and recovery process that we all have to go through, whatever our disabilities are. So I'm going to leave you with that food for thought. And when I get back from my walk, I'll link in my psychologist post and my trauma post. But again, I just want you to think about if you need a therapist and if they can be helpful for you and how to find one. Because again, it's really important that you're able to be honest with your therapist and be able to know that they respect your full identity. All right. Take care. And until next time, keep thriving.